available. We will be sending an email to all the registered participants with the link to our recording, which will be available on the YouTube channel. We have a recording of a lot of other webinars as well available there. So what would you do if you need to ask a question? So we have a user called Meet the Expert. So all you need to do is go click on that user, right click and select chat and post your questions to that user, and we will take up those questions at the end of the Q&A session. So I'm sure you all understand that we'll not be able to answer each and every question, but what we're going to do is any questions that are being asked as a part of this webinar, we are actually taking a note of that, and we will be posting the responses on the blog post on our Informatica network. At the end of this webinar, you will get a link with the survey. So we would appreciate if you guys can take a minute to sort of provide your feedback on the webinar and any upcoming topics that you would like to hear from us. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Alex. Alex, take it away. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. So today we are going to talk about the business entities, their definitions, then we go quickly through the parts of the business entities configuration and what do they mean. After that, we'll talk about the business entities services in general and particularly about the
presentation mode is now disabled. Presentation mode is now enabled.
Okay. And in particular, we'll talk about the RESTful interface to the business entity services. We also will talk about the external calls and how they are going to help in plugging custom logic into the business entity services calls. And finally, we'll have a demo for various business entity services and how they can be used. And that will be it, and we'll complete with the questions and answers. So let's move on. As you all know, main data unit for the master data management is a base object, but you have ever seen the ORS where the base objects are isolated. In 99% cases, they're related with each other. And so it's natural to expect some entity that will aggregate them for the business purposes. And so are the business entities. There are tree-like structures with unlimited depth that aggregate business objects starting from the root and some set of children underneath. One familiar with the IDD of the previous versions and subject areas definitions can say that business entities are the same. Well, yes, they are like subject areas, but there are particular differences between them. First of all, the simple difference is that IDD subject areas were of two-level depth, children and grandchildren, and you never could go gone beyond that. But business entities are of unlimited depth, and you can define whatever number of levels for children as you need. Big difference is that subject areas were available only on the UI of the Informatica data director, while business entities are defined on the hub level, and there are APIs for manipulating them, business entity services. For defining subject area children, you had to have match paths for each of the child, and there is no need for those in business entity definitions. You use just foreign keys as they are in the database. So, since it's better seen once than heard twice, let's go to the our configuration UI, which we call provisioning tool, and so here's the provisioning UI, and we go to modeling and see here business entities. When you click the business entity, you see that it starts with a base object cParky, which is its root. You have a set of fields defined here, and each field corresponds to the column of the base object. So it's close mapping, and there are some attributes for each field, including checkbox searchable. Once it is enabled, this base object field or business entity field goes to the smart search configuration. For those fields will be indexed and will be available for search. And reference 1 stands for lookups that can be used. And going deep, we see children. Actually, another difference between subject areas and business entities, that in business entities you have only two types of children. One, when the parent holds a foreign key to a child and it's many-to-one relationship, and many, the vice versa, when the parent is referenced by multiple children. So the specific of the business entity is that each table you included as a child forms a separate layer. It might be not quite convenient for consumption because each level, like a reference table, is there. So to define what was many-to-many child in subject area, you have to have two layers in the business entity. But this is the raw definition. And in order to make data consumption more convenient, there is another part of the business entity definition, which is business entity view. Let the word view not puzzle you. It's not about the UI, it's about how data is represented. So for each business entity, you can define as many views as you want, depending on various business needs. And you can restrict the particular view to see just a couple of children, some fields, and they can be combined in various ways. So this is a kind of projection of your business entity data on the particular need. But yeah, let's get back to configuration and see. Here we go, business entity views. Say for the same person we have a view, and if you go through the addresses, if you remember that there was a relationship table followed by the address table itself, now in the view we have all the fields from the relationship to address and address itself in a single child, which is absolutely alike with the subject area many-to-many child. But the business entity view itself is just an empty shell without any data, unless you provide the rules how to fill it with particular values from the business entity. And here are the business entity transformations. There are several kinds of transformations in the configuration of the business entity world. Two of them are obvious, which is a business entity to view, which means the set of rules that take data from the business entity and put it into the business entity view. Say we have a transformation for person to person view, and it contains direct transformation which says which field to take from the business entity or its child. See here, we take first child from details and takes a field and put it into the business entity view. And it has groups that hierarchically resembles all the structure of the business entity, putting corresponding data into the business entity view children. And as it is easy to guess, the symmetric transformation that takes data from the view and constructs a business entity out of that. This is used when we do some writing from business entity services that expect view as an input, and underneath they construct the business entity back from this data and work with it. There is another transformation which is business entity to business entity view, the business entity itself, which is used for various kinds of validation. And here usually a cleanse transformation is used, which is basically the mean to call any cleanse function which have exposed and feed the data from the business entity to this cleanse function and receive the response back. Here, if you see the definition, there is a status. So this is a difference with IDD as well. In IDD, you have predefined IDD cleanse function that expected the validation status field to be available. Otherwise, no validation result could have been seen. In the business entity transformations, you can use any cleanse functions that are available in the hub and specify any field as a status output and just configure the status success value to explain to the transformation which means failure and which means the successful execution. If this field is empty, it means that status output must be empty to be successful. All the rest of the values that may come with this field mean that it will be interpreted as an error and returned from the service call. So moving forward, there is a new type of configuration introduced in the business entities, with the business entities, the relationships. Although some base objects can be aggregated as a business entity, it's sometimes convenient to have relationships between different business entities. And for those, the business entity relationships stand. They actually very simple thing. They describe the relationship between two business entities, and here we can see in the modeling business entity relationships. If we will pick one, it usually is backed by the relationship table on as a base object, and it has two constraints for referencing one business entity and another business entity. It might have some meaningful fields that will go with each relationship, but it's optional. It's a very simple thing. So another part of the business entities configuration are tasks. This part is important because unlike the IDD configuration, tasks affect behavior of all write business entity services as well as merge. So task types are similar to task type definition in this IDE subject area, so nothing to tell about. But let's see the other two parts of configuration. So as I said, task types, but the most important thing among the task definitions are triggers. What are the triggers? They are assigned to business entity events, and so far we have three types of events: create business entity, update business entity, and there is an event for match business entity, which is issued when we do the merge. For each trigger, you can specify on what roles it will be assigned, and underneath you can define the business entities. So for the same event, you might have different triggers for the different user roles, and the behavior of the write business entity service or merge business entity service will be different. There is no explicit actions for create task or write active data into the backend as it was in the IDE. It's all configured by the triggers. So if we have a trigger that needs to start the workflow, there is a checkbox here, and this means that whatever you say for the system role, whenever you call merge, it basically starts the merge workflow, or in other words, it will create a task. And how this task will look like is controlled by the another configuration part of the tasks, which is called task template. And here we go to the templates. They are very simple as well. So besides the name that it identifies this template, you define the pattern for the title, and here you can refer task records and its fields, which basically are the root of business entity that participates in the task. And you can use all the fields plus its label to form the task title. So if you have merge with two records, you can specify the title like merging task record with some field 1, 2, and refer to the task record 2. In addition, you specify how many days, in how many days that will be due, its priority, and status, which is usually open. Here is all about the task configurations. As I said, triggers are intensively used by write and merge task services. And so we come to the services themselves. Unlike these CIF APIs that manipulate with their base objects, business entity services, first they manipulate with their business entities, which is expected. And another thing about them is they are kind of open structure that can be configured on the fly. So there is a set of so-called steps, which are elementary operations on business entities, and each business entity service is a chain of one or multiple steps that are executed according to the configuration one by one. So you provide the input, which means business entity and maybe some parameters to the first step in the chain of the business entity service. Once the step is executed, it outputs either the same business entity or modified business entity or something else, and its output is fed as input to the next step and so on until the end of the chain, and then the output of the last step is returned to the user who called the business entity service. What is the relationship between business entity services and the CIF API? Basically, the business entity services use CIF APIs behind the scene. If you enable hub server logging, you will see the chain of CIF calls behind the business entity service execution, but it doesn't mean that you can use CIF APIs with the same efficiency as the business entity services. This is mainly because each CIF call has its own authentication, validation of user privileges and all that stuff, while when you do the business entity service call, all these verifications are done only once, and it makes business entity service more efficient than the equivalent number of CIF services. Once we have all this described, let's talk a bit about how it is organized underneath. All the business entity configurations we were talking about are XML documents that are stored in the single table, which is called crepos COCS config. One historical background. When version 10 started to be developed, business entities and business entity services were called composite objects and composite service respectively. And you may see those abbreviations CO and CS in some configuration and in the code, and unfortunately in exceptions if they haven't. So just to be aware that CO and CS are the composite objects and or business entities and business entity services. So all those configurations are stored in the crepos COCS config table. There are multiple rows in this table, and the config type field actually explains what the particular XML configuration stands for. Here is the screenshot of the this configuration table content. As you can see, there are tasks, composite object definitions themselves, business entity views, their transformations, configurations for searchable, the extensions, RESTful services configuration that we'll be talking about in a minute, composite services themselves, and there is separate configuration for write business entity service that will be out of scope for today. So one important thing about all the business entity and services configuration, they are part of the hub metadata promotion, so there is no need for migrating them separately. It will go with all the ORS metadata. Yes, a bit back. Sorry for being forgotten. There are three important implications from the fact that all the configuration XMLs are stored in the crepos COCS config table. First of all, you can interfere them manually and do some changes in emergency once that happened. Second, once you did any change, you have to perform the ORS met validation in order to bring your modifications to effect. And the third thing which is important, since the configuration is loaded first on the app server startup, it might influence this process in case the configuration has some errors. So there is no, it's not a magic spell when you are set to truncate the COCS config table and restart the application server. It's just the way to exclude the business entity configurations from the process, and then you can bring it back and do the corrections. So let's go further. Since we're talking about the business entity services, let's talk about how they are available. So there are two standard ways of accessing business entity services. One is through the EGB calls, and another one is the SOAP UI. Both are available, but in addition to that, in version 10 we have a RESTful API interface to the business entity services, which means that you can access business entity services using HTTP or HTTPS, and there are two formats supported similarly, that are XML, which is more traditional, and new one, which is JSON. JSON format is quite convenient for all the JavaScript clients, and it can be used without any further transformations. RESTful services utilize most of the HTTP declared methods like GET, which is just a browser call, POST, PUT, DELETE, and in some cases we have patch and options. So there is a standard pattern of the business entity service, which is host and port, then constant part CMX/CS, and if you will use this short part, you will get the list of registered or and available for the business entity services ORSs with all the XML definitions that are required, including the WSDL for the SOAP UI. And then it follows with the ORS ID, and then the rest of the URL depends on the service you want to invoke. In most cases, it follows by the business entity name or business entity view name, but it might be different. The important thing here is the authentication of the RESTful services. By default, it is assumed that we use basic HTTP authentication, which either can be provided upon the first call in the pop-up window of the browser, which asks you for username or password, or there is a shortcut for this if you specify the username and password as a part of the first URL you are accessing. Another way of authenticating business entity services are the cookies that are produced by the E360 web UI. And if in case of any custom authentication you would like to implement, there is a special cookie which is called auth_payload, which expects to contain the byte array encoded into the base 64 standard encoding. And it is also assumes that you installed the correspondent custom login module into the hub, which is the subject actually for the separate discussion. So just to mention it here. Let's go further. One of the most important business entity services is the write business entity service. It works with multiple HTTP methods. POST is used for creating new business entity and somehow in updating existing one. PUT method is used just for updating one existing record, and the delete, which is expected, stands for deleting business entity itself or some of its children. It needs to be mentioned that delete doesn't do any cascade deletion. If you want to delete the whole business entity, you have to do it from top to bottom manually. Very important parameter of the write business entity service is the source system, because it denotes on behalf of which source system you do all the updates into the database. And the new thing that never been used in previous versions of the SIF API is the change summary. The change summary is in fact a part of the business entity data being submitted to the write business entity service, and it describes the difference between present state of the business entity and its previous state. So let's see the examples. You don't need change summary when you create a business entity because there was no previous state. But when you do the update, you have to specify the previous state of the field or child and its new state. In the given example, $original is a field that describes the change summary in the JSON format, and as you will see, the middle name, its new value is null, which means that we are resetting it, but its previous value is meaningful. Then change summary removes the ambiguity between whether you just do not want to change the field or you want to explicitly set it to null. All the same when you are dealing with business entity children, the difference between how child is described in the main part of the business entity and in its change summary explains what must happen with that child. In this particular example, as you will see, phone child in the main part of the business entity is null, but in its original, which means change summary, there is a row ID object of it. It means that we're deleting phone child with a row ID mentioned as 2961 with the call to write business entity service. So a couple of important things about the business entity, write business entity service. First of all, when you do the update, you have to provide all the keys to identify all the elements of the business entity being submitted. It might be row ID object, or it can be source system and plus source key pair. And you have to provide all the required fields, otherwise the validation step of the write business entity service will fail and it will be not able to proceed further. Because on the backend, business entity service do not load missed data and operate only with whatever is submitted from the client. And now let's talk about the ability to extend business entity services with a custom logic. As I said, each business entity service is a chain of steps. So external calls are the steps that are included into the chain of the business entity service execution before and after each step, I mean standard step. So it means that you can plug in your custom logic in multiple places of the standard business entity services. What are the external calls? Actually, the idea is very simple. You can have external web services, which are SOAP calls, and once they are configured, they will be invoked during the business entity service execution, and all the inputs and intermediate data that is passed from one step to another will be available for the external SOAP call. So it can be read, modified, updated, extended, and returned back to the main business entity service execution. In some way, business external calls are similar to IDD user exit, but there are particular differences. First of all, availability. Business entity services external calls are available on API level, while the IDD user exits were restricted to IDD UI only. Another importance is that external calls are executed outside of the business entity service transaction. It means that you won't be able to see uncommitted data during the external call. And finally, the number of places where you can invoke external call are bigger than user exits supported by the IDD. And now let's see how it works. First of all, let's get back to the provisioning UI and see how the external call can be configured. Here we go to extensions, and first part of the extension you need to specify is the WSDL, the SOAP interface definition. It just requires the URL. As you can see, I have the external application which is called this external call, and the example of such an application is available in the MDM resource kit. It is deployed and provides the WSDL. On top of this WSDL, we define SOAP services. I have a SOAP service for custom validation with some endpoint and SOAP port. And finally, on top of the business of the service, we define the external call. And it requires following parameters. We define the business entity on which the external call will be invoked, and we define the service phase, one or several, when it will be invoked. For this demo, I specified that it will be called before validation of right business entity call. Now let's see how it works. So, as I said, we can use a browser for invoking business entity services. The simple thing here is that the minimum here is the authentication, and I see the ORSs that are registered in my environment and all the definitions that correspond to business entity services. Now I can retrieve the business entity metadata. Here's my mouse. Here, I'm getting the list of all the business entities registered in the ORS, and usually each RESTful response contains links that provide you with the further steps retrieving data. In particular, this case, each business entity can be further reviewed with a link like this. And here is the full metadata of the person business entity. Since the browser provides by default only one method get, we need some extra tool for doing for invoking other HTTP methods. And I'm using just a Google Chrome plugin that shows all the details of such method execution. So let's take the person business entity URL, go to the plugin, put it here. As I said, for write business entity service, we need a system name, which will be, in our case, say FA. Then we provide what kind of a data we're expecting. And it will be application JSON. Is it?
Hello.
Application JSON. Yes, that's it. So we expect the same content type from the response, and we need data to create the business entity. And I will not type it in. Instead, I will just put prepared one. So C. I'm going to create business entity person with some fields, 2 phones, and address, and it will be done in one shot without writing any CIF application to utilize multiple calls. So since we're creating a new business entity, it must be post. So we do. And we got validation errors from the custom application I configured because it validated my addresses and phones and found some errors. So let's do the correction of the data. Here I provided the country which was not accepted, and in the address I provided not quite correct postal code. Let's try again. And here we go. The response contains all the keys for created data. Now let's grab the raw ID object and see what we'll get. When you request the business entity, you have to specify a depth to which you'll traverse the data. And here is our business entity created with 2 phones and the address. So another example that I would like to show you is the merge preview. It will require a bit different URL for us. So we'll get back to the plugin, change the URL. Let's go quickly through this. The main thing that shows us that we want to do the merge preview is the action, and the rest is just additional data that we'll get in return. So once again, for not typing in all the data I will just copy it from my preparations. Here, actually, we specify the row IDs of the entities we are going to merge, and specify some overrides that we need. Once again, we do the post, and here is the response, which shows the possible merge result. And in BVT section, we see all the cross-reference that will be in effect. For the middle name that we specified, we see that will be admin_xref, which probably already exists. And down we will see the children as they will be merged into a single business entity. Actually, there are lots of various APIs that can be used by the that are exposed by the business entity services. Say we can ask for the parent tasks. Here is the list of tasks that are available. We can filter them, specifying status, and they will be all be opened. We can retrieve also the data for the particular single task if we need. Then we just add the URL with the row ID, and then you will see the task details, including the task actions available on a given task state, and the record keys here. It means that it will be a merge of business entity person with the row ID 268 to the business entity with row ID 448. If we will grab it and change here the URL to see the person with a given row ID object, person will get this business entity. So this is basically all I wanted to present for today. So let's get back to the presentation, and we already had a demo. Now questions.
Very good. Alex, thanks a lot for your session. So we have 10 more minutes and we are opening up the floor for questions. I know we have already got a few through chat. So if anyone wants to ask, post their questions, please go to the WebEx, on the Meet the Expert user, right click, and you can click on chat and post your questions. So we have a few questions that have come in. So the first one is, how are business entity services exposed, SOAP or REST? Where can we find the definitions?
So actually, that's what I mentioned in the presentation. Both SOAP UI and RESTful services are available, and if you let's get back to the browser. If you type the CMXCS URL, you will see the with DL definition that can be used for accessing SOAP interface.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, we have quite a lot of questions coming in. Is business entity services useful only when we configure and use Entity 360 view in IDD?
No. Business entity services are used when we configure the business entities. And the business entities are configured via provision UI, which says nothing about the IDD. The way IDD is invoked is that if you already have an IDD application, you can generate business entity services out of that. But once generated, business entity configuration are independent.
One more question from Dennis. What is the name of the security provider required for payload authentication?
As I said, there is no out-of-the-box custom authentication, but there is a framework that Hub exposed to plug in some manually implemented login module and user profile provider, and that has been available in previous versions as well. So it's nothing new about that.
Another question from Anna. As part of merge transaction, is it possible to override the child object attributes?
No. So far, at least, merge works only on the root business entity level. So the rest are just combination of the children under the surviving record.
What are EJB endpoints and REST endpoints?
So for the rest, I showed you particular URLs. So everything that under CMX/CS are the entry points for the RESTful APIs. For the EJB, you can use the composite service client, which is available as a part of the Siberian API jar file, and you can find the examples of its use in the what is it? The resource toolkit.
Thank you. Okay. All right. We have a lot of questions coming in. Is there any specific functionality like hierarchy manager which still require IDD configure, or should we avoid IDD altogether?
So actually, there are two things here. Hierarchy management has not been deprecated, and it is still available. But in version 10.2, you don't need IDD configured to see the hierarchy management for the business entities. They will be working without IDD application. And in addition, you have the business entity relationships that in some way repeat the hierarchy management configuration, but they manipulate with the business entity, not HM entities. So don't confuse them.
Does business entities support data masking?
Out of the box, it doesn't. We have the DDM functionality, dynamic data masking, built into the MDM hub, but it is subject for the separate session to discuss how it can be configured. Some things of the data masking you can implement with external calls, actually, because it's available in the read business entity call and can interfere with the data and do the masking for the given user role.
Do we have anything in
unmuted.
for MDM? Sorry?
Well,
Sorry about that. Do we have anything in business entity services for MDM, SSA, name 3, match, merge, rule process?
No, we don't have it so far. So all the APIs related to name 3 are available only via CIF calls.
Okay. We might have time for a couple of questions here. All right, let's see what we have. Can we use CIF calls in business entity services?
Yes, both can be used altogether. And the use of name 3 is a good example of that. So you can do the searches on the particular base objects using name 3, and then load business entities out of row IDs returned by the name 3 search match.
Is the RESTful wrapped around CIF calls?
RESTful wraps? No. Only business entity services are exposed to RESTful APIs.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question. Is Cascade merge and Cascade unmerge supported in business entity REST API?
No, not yet. It's in the plans for the future.
Okay. I think we are on the top of the hour, and I know we did not get a chance to answer every question that was posted on the chat window, but we will certainly we have made a note of all the questions that have been asked, and we will be compiling the responses and will be posting it on the Informatica Network portal on the same place where you registered, right? So there's a blog post. You will be getting an email with a link to the YouTube video, with a link to the survey, and also with a link to the blog post where we have responded to all the questions that were posted. So with that, I think it's an end of this webinar. Alex, thanks a lot for your time, and thanks everyone for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you in our next webinar. Thanks everyone. Have a good day.